Hi, everyone. No greater reminder of climate change than the weather, huh? But it's nice and cool in here. Thanks for coming. I want to introduce two journalists who've worked with the Ground Truth Project for over a year, really like 18 months, on a project that is pretty extraordinary, a climate for conflict. And so Laura Heaton is a writer and is based in Nairobi, has written for a lot of different people, for the New York Times, for Nat Geo, most recently for Foreign Policy, where you can see this piece featured. And Nichole Sobecki has been with, I've been working with Nikki for a long time and have a great opportunity at the Ground Truth Project. We support a new generation of journalists to tell the most important stories of their generation. And we started working with Nikki, I think it's almost 8 years ago, when she first came out of college, and have watched her passion for this work turn into just real brilliance, and someone who's really become a powerful voice for really important stories and for photography and for video. So she worked with us for a while. She's also written for the New York Times Magazine, and she headed up video for AFP in East Africa for about 3 years, from 2012 to 2015. So I want to just say, welcome, you guys. This is your work. But maybe we could start off a conversation with the film and just kind of get right to that. Does that make the most sense?
Sounds great.
So do you want to say anything about the film before we started, or do you want to just go right into it?
We can go right into it and get some thoughts afterwards.
Okay, so this is a film, A Climate for Conflict, that features the journey of their work in Somalia over the last year and a half.
Weather pattern is going to create the fastest growing desert in the world.
You have seen dry valleys, big dry valleys. The livelihood of Somali people is entirely attached to the water and the land. You can imagine how fragile that is.
Climate change is linked to conflict in Somalia. Well, Somalia is not really the reason for these impacts of climate change, but we are paying the price for that.
With this weather pattern, Somalia or Somalis will not survive. A piece of desert called Somalia will exist on the map of the world, but Somalis cannot survive. Will eat each other alive because this environment is not giving us anymore.
ma jirin Allah un baan aqeelayay roob xagga roobnimada iyaan ka noolaanaynay roobkii abaar isku suranay noqotay guban bay wax ku deeyeen baana na yiri guban keen imanayna ableel baan ugu imanay ableelkina waa naga iska baaba'ayno abaarta duuga la yiraaha iyo wax duugtay hadaad magaceega doonayso duuga waxa la yiraahaa dhameeya de abaarta inay dad iyo dunyada haaqayso iyaanu malaynaynaa dad iyo dunyada inay haaqayso dunyadii way dhamaysay dadkana inay daba kaxayso
shan iyo afartanka sanadood abaartaa maanta dhacday ee xoolo naga dhamaysay nolosha daciif bay galaysa markaa waxaa la yidhi ninkaan cuud lahayn ninkaan dunya lahayn doog waa abaar ninka hadday dunyada ka dhammaatay xoolo ka dhammaadaan xeradan adhigu dee intan u kala u baxay labada geed waxay ahaayeen dee geeda ilaahay bixiyey bay ahaayeen har kolka ahaayeen roobku doo daad baa laagta mari jiray markii hore berigii hore limaanaan garaac jiray waan daynay xoolaha harsan jiray dadka harsan jiray ciyaalka harsan jiray laakiin waxaa dhacday geedii inaan nagu kaliftay abaarta dheeraatay kuwii hore ka siyaadii markay dhacday qoys tahay boogtay xoolaha ka dhamaadaan abaarna kugu dhacdo nolosha cidii ka gasho waxay ku kalifaysaa inaad ciyaalka u masaarifayso
Everybody wants to cut, burn, and think about what they can get today. But nobody is looking forward and saying what will happen in the next 20 years.
Charcoal production induces desertification and deforestation. The kids that are farmers will lose their jobs, and because they lose their jobs, they become radical. That is the conflict environment nexus.
waxaan samayn jiray saxmad baan lahaa kalluunka iyo argostada iyo libaaxan gurin jiray anagoo kalluunka iyo libaaxa ka shaqaysanaba waxaan lagu dhacday baraakiib badda ka timi oo dowlad kasta leh wixii shaqaalihii iyo jilifkii iyo qaabkii naga qaadatay dareenku waxaan caalamka dhan baan u sheegnay badan baan u sheegnay markii wax laga qaban waayay waxaan u aragnay wax dee aan annaga gacanteeda maahay cid kale wax naga qaban karin annagu dee wasiixmadaan ku haysanay baddaasaan aadnay difaacii waardiyihiina aanu ku hayn weynay haddaan anayn ka waardiynayna maalintii la jiidanay wixii dabeedna ataagayagu wuxuu noqday wuxuun dee asaan iska ururino fuusta shidaala ama aaki ama lacag qoryo gadno aanu meesha aadno uun kolba dalkaaga u dhimo ama dadkaaga kaa dameeya u dhimo xaalad u ahayd
A very rich environment destroyed by people that come from other places. Kids would see that because of anger, they will become pirates.
When there are no jobs, they are attracted to any crime. It's easier for the extremists to persuade them and give them a plate of plain rice and mirah and have his ears and heart.
marka naxariistu ay yaraato ee meeshii la iskugu soo guuro taasaa markaa dee dhibaatada keenaysa iyo isqabsiga waxaan u rajaynayaa haddii ay taasi sii socoto ay taasi dhacdo waxay dee ila muuqata aniga Soomaaliya ama macnaha Afrikaba haddii taasi dhacdo inaan nololba inaan jirin sababtoo waxa dadku waxay ku tiirsan yihiin waa naxariista Ilaahay xabadana waxa laga soo riday geedkaas ayuu ninku face kaga soo jiray geedkaas kaga soo riday halka isagoo fadhiya oo ceelka jooga ayuu dibadda markaa la wada hadlo markii la soo xabad buu ku riday dibadda markaa kan oo aan meesha soo gaarin ayuu wuxuu sii galay halkan markuu marayay ayuu laba mid
marka hadda soo guuray nafteeda dhibaato badan aan la kulmay kulli hor aan waa idinku sheegay 27 maalin dhexda ku soo jiray dhexdan waan u qabsadeen oo ninka shabaabka ah 5 maalin meel u haysteen oo gaari oo marka hadda soo baxay waa diidanayeen in inta loo soo guuro سكورتكي زائد وسي دران بس دي أباري أو كلا نك دي أسوق درج نفتيس أو عمل ودي عمل وحر حتى عم قاعد بيس لكن نبى أنا باي دي ستاس أو كسي درتي ها وكبيرة ها نك ديس بحث إنه باي بدي أم إلما باي كدي وكبيرة يعني زائد أو بيرام إنه واقولين والجهاد سيدي أو كان أجنبي أو كلا الدلاء بلاي ninkii la jiro sidii hay'ada hadda aniga adigu qoto oo hadda la kulumnay qorta la gooyne aadan oo kale nimankan la jira qorta la gooy iisan shaqdo aw absan qaba loo askarin karaa horta meesha dugsi ayaga ayna dugsi kala ma jira dugsiga la geli oo markii dugsi la geli la tashkiilay aqlagooda baa yaryahay waxaa guursan karaba nin ayaga dhexdooda ayaga naftooda guursan karaba oo saas ay u kala karaan
macnaha waxa weeyaan waxaan rajaynay waxaan filayaa inaan nololba inaan jirin haddii ay taasi ila muuqato aniga Soomaaliya ama macnaha Afrikaba
laakiin badii eba aan khasarada meesha ku jirta iyo dadkii iyo dhibta ka socota dadkii ka haray oo ka haray ku jira maasha taas waxa weey waa fududahay waa ka soo fududanaya maalin waxba la helaa maalin waxba la waayaa mar baan shidaal kugu go'aya nasiibك calaf markaas ma wala helaa
ما يعمل أو دجال أي كسر حتى قرر مال أي كأركان يعني يصير أنقب أو كلام مال قرر أي كأركان أما سين دجال أما التشكيل أو كلام أي كقرار تمري ساس أي تاي أنا واحد تكنن مكان قالن
My conviction and my belief is the security of this country, the existence of the people, of the Somali people, is entirely dependent on what happens on the natural resources. if we don't intervene as quickly as possible, we should expect more wars, we should expect more conflicts, and we should expect more terrorists who can recruit those desperate young boys. The question is, what can we do? Is it possible to intervene? And my answer is yes.
Because we are human and we are alive, we are thinking beings. And it's not in our nature, I think, to give up. Nobody likes to die sitting, yeah?
I wanted to just say this film represents a real dedication to a whole team that has been working for a year and a half on the issue of climate change. And the team started back at the Paris conference for climate change. And that's really where we began our reporting. And Nikki joined us there, and then Laura came onto the team as Nikki got deeper into the story. And the idea was that we wanted to try to set out to tell the story of the human consequences of climate change. The series is called Living Proof, and the Somalia chapter is one of 5 chapters. Some of the others went through the Arctic, where we looked at suicide rates among the indigenous of the Arctic. We looked at human trafficking in the Philippines, which you don't often think of as a climate story, but it is one. And there are other stories that go through the year, and we hope you'll check it out. We're going to share the URL at the end so you can follow the body of work. But I think what was most powerful about this film and the way it lands was the commitment, the teamwork that went into it. And Beth Murphy, director of Ground Truth Films this year, so she deserves to be recognized, and also Ann O'Brien, who's the assistant director of Ground Truth Films. So they are both big parts of this. Thanks. But what it really boiled down to was this real determination you guys had to tell this story. And telling the story of climate change, as we've learned through this process, is really hard. People's eyes roll over, even though it's all around us. It's certainly in the news right now in Florida and Texas, but it seems to come washing across our reality every day. And then as a journalist, it's really hard to find a way to tell that story. So could you just share with us sort of how you got going on the journey to tell this story, and what were some of the challenges you faced in telling a story so sweeping and so big?
I mean, I think that we both feel very strongly that climate change is one of the most critical issues of our time, and we wanted to find a way to tell the story. So I'm going to let Laura get into some of the backstory of how we came across this particular tale, but just a bit more broadly, as the photographer and cinematographer on this project, you know, I think that we have certain associations with images of climate change, the Arctic, polar bears, and one of the things that we wanted to help reinforce with this story was the immediacy of this problem, that this is not something that is happening down the line for future generations in places like Somalia and other parts of the world. Climate change is happening now, and people's lives are being transformed, and they're having to make really, really difficult choices. And I think when you look at some of the characters in the film, or hopefully you'll check out our container after this, or maybe you already have, we really wanted to look at that immediacy and that transformation, but also, how climate change and environmental degradation are linked to security, how they're pushing people to migrate, and how they're increasing conflict in places like Somalia. So that was sort of where we were coming from, and some of our goals when we went out to do this project. And let Laura tell a little bit more of the backstory.
Sure. So Nichole and I are both based in Nairobi. I feel funny saying that. I just moved to London 2 weeks ago. But that's Nairobi for 7 years, and it really feels like home. So one of the things that we certainly felt when we were living in Kenya, like people talk a lot about how the rains are changing, the rain patterns are changing, planting and seasons are changing. And certainly even more so in a place like Somalia, a nomadic country, people are nomads traveling, with their herds each season. And one of the things that we noticed when we started talking to people about Somalia is that this is a place that's one of the most vulnerable on the planet to climate change. And we already know about Somalia. Hear about Somalia, Black Hawk Down, Al-Shabaab, the pirates, Captain Phillips. But here's a place where people right now are already facing these terrifying ideas that the rest of us, for the moment at least, many of us at least, don't have to face as part of our day-to-day life. And so we thought, let's try to go to, look at what's happening in Somalia with people's lifestyles. And then we learned that there was actually a British scientist who was doing some work in Somalia in the 70s and 80s, and he created a huge body of environmental documents about the country. He and a team of Somali researchers did a huge land survey. They covered the whole country. And as luck would have it, when he had the foresight, really, in 1991 when the government was overthrown, which led to the Black Hawk Down incident that you all probably have heard and seen the film about, when he managed to steal back basically all of that material and put it in an attic in the UK for safekeeping. So when we learned about that material, we thought, how interesting would it be if we could design our reporting trips around the places that he photographed? They'd never been published before. So if we could put together a magazine piece that would show his old photographs, and then Nichole is a photographer, I'm a writer, so we designed these trips together to go back and be able to revisit the places. And I must say, as journalists, we had no idea if it would even be compelling. And thankfully, we met Charlie, who was willing to give us the benefit of the doubt, basically, and some money, a fair bit of money, to go to Somalia and start looking into this. And as you'll see when you go to our container, if you've seen it already, there's a series of photographs that show their diptychs. There's, on the left-hand side, there's an old photograph. On the right-hand side is the new photograph of the same location. And it's quite heartbreaking, actually, to see the differences. And so as part of that journey to track down these same sites that Dr. Watson went to, we also we were meeting people all along the way who were explaining to us how their lifestyles had changed. And then Dr. Watson himself was kidnapped in 2008, working in Somalia, probably by Al-Shabaab, and has vanished. And so his personal mystery and his commitment to the environment in Somalia really animated all of this work. And as I think Charlie will mention, it did generate a body of work. So.
Just adding on to what Laura is saying, I hope you do get to see the diptychs, because it's, I find it really striking how much the landscape has changed in a relatively short window of time. We're talking 30, 35 years. But the process of doing that, we were following these old maps that the team of British scientists had made, and it was incredible going through these remote parts of Somalia with these hand-drawn maps. There are drivers and security, everyone having photos that we're looking for, trying to find the right ridge line. It was one of the more unique experiences I've had the privilege to be a part of in my time reporting. So it was a real process, and I hope what we were able to do was really show that transformation and how quickly it can happen, and the fact that this isn't something that we need to begin worrying about down the line. It's really something for now.
So we want to get to your questions quickly, but I also want to say for any of you who are in the back, if you want to come up front, there are seats up here, so feel free to come on up. I want to do 2 more questions with you guys, and then we would really love to hear your questions. But I do remember the day you guys came to me, and it was in a bar in London, and it was just this moment. I could feel that you were on this journey. It was like the day 1 of the journey. You had just come from the attic, and they were showing me these photographs. And it really has literally been like watching Nikki and Laura go off on this journey with these secret maps to find out the story of Dr. Watson. And along the way, the narratives have become so powerful. The Bari Hamza story, as you saw, one of their key sources, one of the people who really enlightened them about the environment of Somalia, a real hero for the environment of Somalia, was killed in the violence in Somalia while they were in the process of making this film and doing the collected body of work. And the danger of covering a story like conflict in Somalia and how climate is fueling that conflict or maybe becoming a threat multiplier is real. And I think it's worth talking a little bit about how you did this. This is a very dangerous assignment. Ground Truth is really committed to safety. As an editor, I was so impressed with the way you guys took risk assessment very seriously. And you went about your work with great maturity and great discipline. Maybe you could talk a little bit about that, some of the real challenges you faced in covering a country like Somalia. Such an important story to tell, but there were a lot of risks along the way. How did you handle that?
Do you want to start? Sure. Okay. So yes, working in Somalia is quite challenging, and one of the things that we had to do immediately when we were thinking we wanted to try to retrace Dr. Watson's steps was just look at a map and see where we could actually get to, because like I said, his work was all over the country and we really were quite limited to some key areas. So basically we spent a lot of time talking to people who'd been working in those areas and put together a really comprehensive list of contacts, and also kind of mapped out like what types of, in each area, kind of what some of the stories would be that we might be able to get to. So for example, you see the story of the former pirate in this piece, and he was someone that it took a lot of time to convince to speak to us, first of all, and then we were actually quite shocked when we were there and meeting with him and had a conversation with him just more informally, and then he agreed to let us film him, which we found to be quite remarkable. And I think a lot of that also comes down to the fact that we had a really phenomenal team on the ground, translators, one translator in particular, his name was Mohamud, and he was working with us in several places and really became part of our team. And so he helped us navigate a lot of those challenges, like how do we convince a former pirate to speak to us, and then can he drive us around in his taxi maybe a bit? That's a little tricky, challenging. So that was helpful.
That's the kind of things that keep you up at night if you're an editor, knowing they're doing that.
Just adding on, I think that, Ground Truth supported this project from the very beginning, and that was an incredible privilege because both Laura and I have been working in Somalia since 2011. In fact, the first time we were ever published together was in Somalia in 2011. Laura wrote a piece for Newsweek that they ended up using my photos for. But those trips are typically 3 or 4 days, a week at most. You're very restricted to where you can go and how you can report. So the opportunity to go into really remote parts of the country with a lot of research and planning was tremendous, and to really spend time. And yet, even in this sort of incredibly privileged situation, you still have to be very careful about how much time you spend in any place, how much time you spend with any person. And so it was one of the real challenges that we faced was also building that type of intimacy and depth that you look for in a story like this. And so we tried to go back more than once to various places and sort of to go meet people, begin to build trust, begin understanding their story, leave and return. And we feel incredibly grateful to have had the opportunity to do that.
we were grateful that you were able to do it, and I almost felt like jumping in when you said that you know, Charlie gave you the money. I don't have any money, but we have tremendous supporters in the MacArthur Foundation and the Ford Foundation, and specifically this family that started the JMB Charitable Trust that's funded all this work, which is like, it's amazing to have the opportunity to do this. And last thing I wanted to ask you about is just that work, that whole body of work under Living Proof tells the story of climate change. And I think it's interesting for those of you who are here with attention to the craft of photography and to the spirit of storytelling, the amazing ways people are telling stories. What Nikki and Laura did was pretty extraordinary. They did a film with ABC News Nightline. They did a beautiful podcast. Laura's piece is a really strong narrative written in Foreign Policy magazine. Nikki's photography featured here, and of course her videography featured in the film. And I hope it's not the end. I hope we can keep going. It's about iterative storytelling, layered, deep, immersive storytelling. And I just wanted to maybe see if you had any thoughts on that, sort of what it was like to work across the medium and how you worked as a team and how you did that. And then we're going to go to your questions, so please have them ready.
Well, I think one thing that we thought a lot about on this project was audience. I mean, the point of storytelling is reaching people. And I think that there's a tendency with climate change reporting, which can be so dark and make people feel hopeless and ultimately shut down and sort of not go any further and not engage with it. So we talked a lot about that, how we could try to avoid that and get people to keep coming closer, and also how to reach a wide variety of audiences. So ABC Nightline reaches over 3 million people, and that was an incredible opportunity. I mean, I've probably never done anything that reached 3 million people. And Foreign Policy, on the other hand, had depth and nuance and allowed us to kind of engage with the story in a very different way. The podcast and the photos, and so it was really important for us to think about how to sort of, you know, just really keep people engaged, I think, is the most important thing.
Yeah, and I think that you know, each of those mediums allowed us to tell stories in different ways. So, you know, the podcast was actually, I think, the first thing that we came out with, and you know, that for telling a story through radio, like, we really needed one person to really kind of rally behind, I guess. And so, like, Mohammed, who's in the film, and who's talking about his children and his fear of them being recruited. We were able to dig in deeper in the podcast with him, and we had a lot of really incredible testimony from him living in the refugee camp. So yeah, it was, I mean, it's been about a 2-year project in total to pull together all these different elements. And yeah, we're really hoping that there will be sort of a next phase of this project. And the photos, especially, one of the phenomenal things, fantastic phenomenal things about being featured here at Photoville, which we're so grateful for, is that now, you know, we have this body of work that's been curated. Nichole did a really expert job pulling together the photographs and creating this really intricate framing system for hanging them. And so we now have this body of work that's physical, that's not just online, that's not just in the magazine, but what we're hoping to do now is have that, take that on the road, I guess. So if anyone's interested, get in touch.
It is really important, I think, that you guys keep going, and we'll be watching you. Maybe we could share the URL, the screen for the website while we go to questions. And I want to just say, before we run out of time, thank you to Photoville. I mean, for a chance to really highlight this project, this powerful photography. It's such an amazing community here. We really feel honored to be part of it, and you guys should really be congratulated. Your work really stands out here. You did a great job. So, any questions?
I think some of the people that you hear in the film, the narrators, whose voice you hear but you don't see, they were the people who gave us the most hope, I think. Abdi Razak Ali is working on climate change policy in Somalia and working on a way of sort of bringing back some of the forests that have been lost. Fatima Jibril is an incredible environmental activist. But to be fair, and there are also efforts by the UN to begin sort of pilot programs to help adapt to climate change. So there are efforts happening. They're small and nascent. And you know, I think the thing that really left me with a sense of hope was just the drive and passion that some of these individuals had for the cause.
Anything, Laura?
No, I think, yeah, that's the
I would just say to your point about hope, there's also urgency. Like, I think some of the thing that's missing from the climate coverage is a sense of, why do we need to care, like, right now? I mean, once in a while we're hit over the head with that in Florida or in Texas. But I've covered terrorism for 25 years in Iraq and in Afghanistan, and you know, where movements like Shabab are being shaped by events, and we're only now, I think, recently seeing the United States military and thinkers, you know, who can really say this extreme weather is creating extremism, and there is this connection between the two. So if you can get some forces to start to put that together, that conflict has this fueling mechanism through climate change, I think that's important too. It's not necessarily hope, but it's urgency, and I think that's a really important part of what you guys pulled forward in your work.
Sure. So I guess definitely in some of these communities, us being there, you know, would raise a lot of questions. This is one of the reasons why we couldn't stay for very long in certain places. So we definitely, I mean, that was part of the reason. Basically, we kind of wanted to, while we were still sort of under the radar, we wanted to do our interviews, take the photographs that we needed to, and then probably move on. So, as far as we know, there weren't any, you know, there weren't repercussions from the communities that we spoke in, the communities where we were visiting. And I think, you know, especially that's another great advantage of working with sort of the same team in each of these different places, because it gave us a chance to kind of follow up with people and make sure things were okay. I mean, one of the places where Ali is one of the men that you see in the film, and he talks, his cousin had been shot 2 weeks before, and you know, so that was pretty tense, because one of the ways, this is a very remote, tiny community, it's not even a village really, and one of the ways that conflict is often handled is that if one person is killed, then someone else needs to pay sort of a blood price for it. And so, you know, we were there when the family was basically organizing to try and find the shooter, and then if he wasn't found, he would probably be, someone else from the family was probably going to be killed. And it was a really kind of insightful moment for us to have these conversations for us as journalists, because one of the things that you often hear in Somalia is about clan conflict and like these intercommunal violence that's existed for, you know, centuries. And really one of the things that was quite striking in this case is this was a community that hadn't had conflict. This was not like, and they were fighting over this pasture land. There hadn't been conflict there. But then this cousin was killed, Ali's cousin was killed, and then the guy who fled was at large. And like, you could see how, depending on what happened in the next few months and like years probably, that maybe 20 years down the line, we might come back there and, you know, someone would say, oh, this is the community that's been riled in intercommunal violence for centuries. And here we were standing right at the beginning of it. And so I think that was pretty eye-opening for us.
Any other questions? Yeah.
I think that there are organizations working on that. In our conversations with people, that wasn't a big theme that we discussed. I think that when you look at, I understand the relationship between birth control and climate and population growth.
That's my question. Did they see the link?
I think that
they definitely saw the link. I mean, we weren't talking about birth control, but I mean, one of the things
when it comes
that was
to family size.
Family size and also just overpopulation. I mean, that was something that You know, it's one of the other challenges about covering climate change and environmental degradation more broadly is, you know, it's a host of factors that are compounding, you know, the whatever tensions already exist in a community. And so one of the things that Ali, the man whose cousin was killed, one of the things he kept talking about is, yes, the weather patterns are changing, and there are just too many people and too many animals here. And so I'm not sure, like, if that, you know, factors into like that he feels that there's something he and his family can do about it. We didn't get into that, but it's certainly on everyone's radar that, like, there are too many people to sustain that this land can sustain.
Well, one thing, we were thrilled to be a part of Foreign Policy's climate change issue. They dedicated an entire magazine to climate change reporting, which felt really refreshing and really important. And you're right, I think it's a challenge for editors to push for. I mean, we heard from a lot of editors saying, you know, this just isn't the moment, or we can't fund this right now. It's a very real challenge, and I think that, you know, we just need to keep pushing and keep finding ways around that. One of the ways that we tried to do that was really looking at the security link, saying, you know, this isn't just something we can keep putting off. This has to do with security. This has to, you know, this is immediate. And that was a way that we sort of found to address it. But I think we just have to be really creative and find ways in, because there's, I mean, as you know, I'm sure you know, it's deeply important. We also felt incredibly lucky to have the type of support that we had to do it.
I think to your point on the political landscape, it was kind of an amazing moment for us when this whole project, as I shared with you, started at the Paris Climate Conference, where the historic agreement was signed, and we left with such great optimism that there's this momentum forward. And these guys went out in the field, and the rest of the team went out in the field, worked really hard for a year, and then we all gathered in Morocco in November of 2016. And it was opening day of the conference that Trump was elected. And I wish we had camera rolling for the faces of you know, thousands of people whose lives revolve around the issue of climate change, looking up at these screens as the returns came in and watching the devastation on their faces and the sense of a community that just lost American leadership in a movement that took like 25 years to build. It was incredible. And I think now, almost a year later, what I notice is the momentum is still there. It's just that America's not going to be a leader in it, at least not Washington, but the states will be and others will be.
And I just want to say, the climate change issue that this story was a part of came out on the same day that Trump pulled out of the Paris Agreement, which felt
that's right, I forgot.
particularly poignant.
Yeah, the narrative symmetry has been amazing with your project. But I think to your point, a couple things I would say is, did you see the Leonardo DiCaprio film? It was amazing, I thought. And I think there's a lot of sort of independent, immersive approaches to climate change like that one that are extraordinary. Another one is Years of Living Dangerously, if you've seen that. Really immersive storytelling, beautifully done, well-funded. And there is funding out there. People do care about this issue, and you can find the funding. And I want to encourage people to keep going at it and get in touch with us if you have a good idea, particularly if you fit within the definition of emerging journalist. We've removed the idea young. It's emerging. I don't care what age you are. If you're emerging, you're emerging. And so really get in touch and know that there's a lot of great work being done out there, important work. It's just getting harder and harder for it to find signal at such a time of dissonance and noise on the issue. I think we have time for at least one or two more questions.
Katrina? Yeah, I mean, that's something. I mean, Somalia has always been hot and dry, and they've always faced drought. And they are actually incredible resilience. They're incredibly resilient to that, and they have these really brilliant ways of adapting and surviving. And what we saw in our reporting was that as it becomes hotter and drier and drought becomes more frequent, it's not happening every 10 years anymore, it's happening every year, every other year, people just don't have a buffer to survive. And I think that sort of breaking down of the buffer is being noticed, it's being seen, and there's, the necessity for more aid and more support is, people are aware that it's there, whether they can get it and whether there's actually the dollar signs behind that is a big problem. I mean, there's 20 million people at risk of famine in Somalia, South Sudan, Yemen, and northern Nigeria, and the UN and other organizations have a fraction of the money they need to support that crisis. I think that Buri Hamza, who is one of the narrators in the film, part of his job and part of his work and part of his drive and passion was trying to make people see that link, saying, there is a narrative in Somalia, and I think this applies to international organizations and the government itself, that we need to address security, and once we're more secure, we can then address the environment. And I think that, what he was trying to get people to understand is that it doesn't work that way. You can't fully address security until you look at the root causes of it, and one of those causes is the environment. So it's, you have to start looking at this much more holistically.
Also, when we were out doing a lot of this reporting, we were trying to see projects like adaptation projects. And it was challenging because that doesn't always compute well for storytelling. But one of the things that was also, it was promising in some ways and quite discouraging in others. I would say that the people who are working on these projects care so much about them. It was really remarkable working with a group called Adesso, seeing some of the projects that they were doing, and even some projects that the UN development program were doing, trying to figure out how to address erosion. There's a really striking portrait when you go into the container of a man, an elder, standing in front of this eroded land. And it's so dramatic because, we think of erosion as sand dunes and things. But what this looks like in Somalia is it's from a plane, it looks like this kind of lacy pattern on the ground. But when you're standing on the ground next to it, it's like a 2-story, deep pit, and it just goes on and on across a huge expanse of land. And it was quite dramatic for us to visit that and to see what that means then. If you're someone who's approaching this area, you've gone past this pasture, many, many years, and now it's completely zigzagged with these huge crevices. You aren't going to be able to cross it with your animals anymore. And so we went to see them with some of these erosion sites with UNDP, and it was with an environmentalist who was working with them, and he was showing us this project, and it was they were basically trying to, there wasn't a whole lot they could do with the erosion that had already taken place, but they were basically looking at the way that the water patterns were forming and trying to sort of head them off, so stop them at least where they were, by building these sand dam types of things. And it was just, it was great to see in that spot, but it just was we looked out across this huge, expanse of land, and it's dry, and you see the wind whipping across it, and it feels quite daunting.
We have time for one last question.
So, sort of one project that we both found to be really, really exciting and really tangible is being shepherded by Abdi Razak Ali, he was one of the narrators, and I guess there isn't a portrait of him in the container, but he's kind of one of the main voices in the magazine piece. And so he has this, he's just starting this, we'll see what happens with it, but he's working with a seed bank in Kenya to try to identify and reintroduce indigenous species to Somalia that have either gone extinct or because the biodiversity has decreased so much, they're just not very viable anymore. And so that's it's really tangible because it's he could actually working with some of these maps that Dr. Watson's team, which Dr. Ali was actually part of his team back in the day when he was just out of college. But so this land survey from the 70s and 80s is actually a way to tangibly map where plants were growing, where different flora lived back in the day before deforestation, before the Civil War, before climate change, and before climate change started to really affect Somalia in this way. So that felt like a moment of hope when we actually went with him to one of his meetings at the seed bank in Nairobi, and seeing him and the director of the seed bank make these connections, that there were these old maps and field notes that would actually be the guide for them. That felt like a real glimmer for us and for them. They were ecstatic about this. And then I would say that one of the parts that you actually don't see in this reporting, but that I've been looking into quite a lot in my reporting is the climate scientists who are studying drought patterns in East Africa. There are some really brilliant scientists who are looking at trying to understand why the weather patterns in the world are changing and how we can sort of track them. Not that we can necessarily change them, but if we can better predict the way that weather patterns are going to play out in a place like East Africa, we can preposition aid, for example. We can, help people settle in places that will hopefully, if the science can prove it too, would be immensely helpful to show where sort of the more viable places are to live. And so that's really, it's pretty complicated stuff, like looking at how different ocean currents, and ocean and atmospheric currents over Indonesia and over the Western Pacific Ocean are going to play out in Somalia. One of the really kind of conundrums they're facing right now is that all of the scientific modeling is predicting that East Africa would become more wet, and that isn't what's happening. So they're trying to tweak these models and figure it out. So it's kind of this niche science field right now that is obviously becoming really, really important.
Just quickly adding on, I think those are fascinating examples, and I think we need so much more. So it's actually, I think that part of the solution is your students, people who are from these areas, who understand them, the context, are having a phenomenal education, and who are driven to come back and help make a difference, because we need a lot more.
I think storytelling also has a role in highlighting solutions and framing the urgency of the issue. And I think because we're a community of people here celebrating storytelling, that's something not to be forgotten. We have to keep coming up with ways of staying on the story. So thank you for the question. I think what a great way to end on looking toward some solutions and thinking about that. And I want to thank you, Nikki and Laura, for extraordinary work. Thanks.